Same old man. Game over.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
So serious.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast review for August 29th, 2023, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody. This episode is going to be a lot of fun because whoever wins between Brendan and I, the winner will get to be on a real podcast. We get to do it in real life.
That sounds dangerous. I hope we don't crash.
Yeah, I just hope not to crash and burn. That is absolutely the goal here.
Vroom, vroom, vroom. Yep, exactly.
Have you ever played Gran Turismo?
No, I have not. We kind of talked about this on episode 549, where we talked about our not just our favorite video games, but video games that we would love to see adapted into movies. We acknowledge that mostly me, not much of a gamer.
No.
And most of the games I played were pre-2000.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I haven't really played much Gran Turismo.
Unless Gran Turismo came out in 1994, Brendan has not played it.
And last I checked, it was a little bit later than that.
Okay, a little bit later than that. But yeah, the mid-90s and Nintendo almost exclusively, that was Brendan's forte into the realm of video games.
Yeah.
And since then, not quite his realm of expertise.
Yeah. I actually just looked this up. So you said, what, 1994? And I said a little bit later than that. I was actually being kind of facetious, thinking it was way more contemporary. But no, the first ever release was Gran Turismo in 1997.
Hey,
so it literally was.
Not too far off.
I should have been playing Gran Turismo, I guess. But, well, this was a PlayStation property. At that time, I was strictly Nintendo. That was my MO
fair.
as a kid. So it makes sense as to why I wouldn't have played it.
Yeah, no, that's perfectly fair. I never played Gran Turismo as well. And in my youth, it was a lot of sports games, which I believe I noted on episode 549. And even to this day, I don't have a ton of time for it, but when I do, I usually will pull out NHL 23 or whatever the latest version is. Like that's usually what I'm doing because it's a way for me to escape and I don't have to really overthink it. As much as I would love to delve into these more cinematic games, but that involves being much more engaged, and I just don't have the bandwidth for it most of the time.
There are some video games that require just less attention, if that's the best way to put it, and it's more immediate like that, which is why sports games fall into that category. Heck, even Mario Kart kind of falls into that category in its own, like cartoonish way. I guess a game I used to love as a kid was Mario Party. So
for sure.
Yeah, there was less intimidation by the narrative, right? And I get that.
Yeah, I mean, because gaming for me personally, at least these days, it's chill time. It's to relax. It's for me to space out and either listen to music or listen to a podcast, whatever it is. I'm just trying to relax. The last thing I want is my brain to be running at 100 miles an hour and then my tear ducts getting involved, which
you just want your reflexes to be working at 100 miles per hour, not your mind. That's why I always play Crazy Taxi for that reason.
Yeah. So like I tend to simply put on the PlayStation and I'll just chill. That's usually what I'll do.
Gotcha.
I mentioned on episode 549 though, I played a little bit of the Hogwarts Legacy game that came out earlier this year. That was a lot of fun.
Yep.
But typically, as much as I think that I would like a lot of these games because they are so cinematic, many of them are, I think I would like them, but I just don't have the time. I don't have the bandwidth for it.
Yeah, I hear you, man. I hear you.
But that is to say, Gran Turismo as a racing simulator isn't something that I ever really participated in, but I did do a bunch of like aerial simulators. I've done a lot of aircraft simulators because my uncle flew in the Air Force.
Yeah,
for a
that
long
was your
time.
thing. Yeah, that
was
your
my
thing.
thing. So I've done a lot of those. If they want to convert that into a movie, sign me up. I'll be the next
And
protagonist.
I think that's where we need to make the clear distinction that when we talk about Gran Turismo, we are in fact talking about a simulator. I mean, that was really how it's been described as. That's how the loyal fan base would probably refer to it as. So hopefully they're not offended when we call it a video game. I get it. I get it. And they refer to it as a simulator in this movie, as we'll talk about.
They do. Absolutely. A few times.
Yeah.
So yes, we are here to talk about Gran Turismo. This is directed by Neill Blomkamp. It stars Archie Madekwe, David Harbour, Orlando Bloom, Jim and Hanso, and a few others that come and go throughout the film. If you're not familiar with it, even though we somewhat just talked about it there briefly, but this is based on an inspiring true story of a team of underdogs, a struggling working class gamer, a failed former race driver, and an idealistic motor sport executive who risk it all to take on the most elite sport in the world. All right. With all of that said, let's go ahead and jump right into this, Brendan. What did you think about Gran Turismo?
We're talking a lot about episode 549, right? Which is where we talked about our favorite video games that we would love to see adapted into film. I want to reference that first by saying something that I think we did talk about there is that we kind of have to acknowledge that technically speaking, Gran Turismo is not a video game adaptation. And for those of you not watching on YouTube, I'm using quotes around the word adaptation because, as you said, this is a true story. In fact, the game itself or the simulator itself is kind of a character in this movie, right? It's not like a meta way. It's just it was part of the true story, but it's not an adaptation of that game or what that simulator entails. So I guess we'll make that clear up front. But I also want to reference episode 548. Was it the week before that where we talked about the best movies that embody the Roger Ebert ethos? It's not what it's about, it's how it's about.
Yep.
And for much of that episode, we talked a lot about sports movies because sports movies have a formula.
It's funny how this is coming off the heels of that episode.
It really is perfectly timed, right? This is a very formulaic movie, and through, it knows it. It's not hiding it. We sort of talked about this on episode 549 as well with our video game topic that in many ways, this movie is kind of a commercial for PlayStation, right?
Yep.
So of course it's going to follow a typical uplifting sports drama formula to create this uplifting and inspiring message. And I get that. All I care about is it a good movie? Does it do what it needs to do well?
The how it's about.
Yes, the how.
Yes.
I think it kind of gets there, but also kind of doesn't.
Okay.
I tweeted this out that I think Gran Turismo will probably end up as the year's biggest, quote, there's a great movie in there somewhere, end quote, movie. Like I feel like that's really what this is, because that story you laid out there, that true story that this is based on, is absolutely fascinating. It would make a great movie. And I do think there is a great movie here, potentially. I'm just not sure if it was properly mined. And I don't know if it's a scripting thing or a direction thing. I'm kind of leaning towards the scripting here because it does at times feel very much like a first draft. It's very high level, especially given the morals and ethics at play here, that I do think the film is interested in. It just doesn't really dive into it at all. It takes the easy way out. And I'm not sure if Neill Blomkamp as a director and, just given his overall style, is able to really mine something as intriguing from that story as he perhaps could have. It's a very interesting shift for him, right? For Neill Blomkamp specifically. In many ways, this could have felt like a director for hire job, and in some ways it kind of is. But I still sensed a lot of his usual flair, that it still felt mostly like a Blomkamp film when you compare some of the video gamey aspects to some of the sci-fi tropes of like a Chappie or an Elysium. Like I could actually see a lot of comparisons, aesthetically speaking.
For sure. Yeah.
And I think some of those are at least interesting, but I do think overall, as much as that there are great scenes here and great performances, if anything, the performances are the best thing about this movie, and they make most of it work where it needs to. It does also feel like a bit of a missed opportunity for me, just given how fascinating that the story is.
Okay. Yeah. It sounds like I'm perhaps a little bit higher on this than you. And some of that comes down to the formula and looking at this within the context of it's not what it's about, it's how it's about.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it. I think some of it also for me comes down to Neill Blomkamp himself, because he's such a hit or miss director, mostly a miss director for a lot of people. However, if you're watching us on YouTube, you can see I am a champion for Chappie. I really like that film.
Okay. I think we need to at least talk about Neill Blomkamp's filmography for a little bit. Chappie especially, that's a film I need to watch again. I really do.
It's so weird.
It's so weird.
Messy,
like I will say this just up front right now. I will acknowledge that I think Gran Turismo is a better movie than Chappie, but I think I like Chappie more. Just given the brazen strangeness of it. I mean, that's a movie that is certainly wearing its RoboCop influence on its sleeve, and it's not hiding it. But the narrative structure of that movie, the characters that it chooses to align most with, is very bold and kind of gross at times.
Yeah.
I kind of admire the meanness of that movie as I've gotten older.
Yeah. I love its bold ambition, and aesthetically it's trying to channel, speaking of Chappie, it's channeling that griminess of District 9 and also trying to capture this high concept-ish sci-fi that, again, that District 9 was trying to go after as well. Now, District 9 is a really great movie. I still think that holds up. I've seen that a couple of times since it came out in 2009, and I think it's really great. Elysium is a film that I like in parts. There are scenes, performances, individual things about it that I think are good, but on the whole, I don't think it really works. That's
I'm
where
with you.
Blomkamp, I think, stumbles on his ambitions. And you can argue the same thing about Chappie, but I think Chappie is a way more seamless film. And even when it's not, its messiness, I kind of admire because of its ambition.
That's a movie that I think kind of requires a little bit of messiness. Elysium had a lot of rules, a lot of logic to try and tie things together, so the messiness becomes a problem in that regard. So, and also the other thing too, and why I think Gran Turismo at least mostly works versus doesn't work, I mentioned the performances, right? And when you look at District 9 and Chappie, what's the commonality there? A great performance by Sharlto Copley.
Absolutely. That was another element I wanted to bring up. I'm glad that you mentioned that, because Sharlto Copley gives one of the best motion capture performances we've seen that nobody talks about.
I'm with you, man.
Nobody talks about, and he is genuinely great. I don't care what you think of the movie. Maybe it doesn't work for you. You don't like it. You can't deny his performance. It is
I'm with you.
Genuinely affecting and really great. And even with some of the other characters that we see in the film, including Chappie himself, to your point that you mentioned earlier in terms of how Chappie embraces the messy qualities of it, I think that is perhaps intentional because its characters are extremely murky. Like everything about that film thematically, the characters, the performances, that all operates within this gray area that I love. And it also comes with a really underrated Hans Zimmer score that I think is very good as well.
That's a good point. Yeah.
So there's so much
for a rewatch. I really
Chappie.
do. I really want to rewatch Chappie.
The only thing about that film that doesn't work for me is the Hugh Jackman stuff. That to me is
fair.
where it becomes a conventional movie. Instead of leaning into its weirdness all the way through, there are elements with Hugh Jackman specifically where Neill simply lets the film, become this conventional drama or sci-fi movie in terms of its plotting and what Hugh Jackman is up to in that movie. And the film does suffer from that. But thankfully, at least for me, I would argue it doesn't overtake the movie. And I think there's a lot to really enjoy out of Chappie, even if it is a little bit of a disjointed experience.
Yeah.
And then Demonic is a movie that I just don't really care for. It just didn't really work.
It's
for me
just
all that
the
much.
problem with that movie is that it's just kind of dull. I hate using that word. I really do, because I feel like you need more meaning behind a criticism than just dull or boring. But I can't think of any other word for it. And that's I think it's because that's a movie that shouldn't be as drab as it is.
I agree. I think that's a great way to articulate it.
It has a fair concept. It just like it feels half-assed, to put it lightly.
I agree. I agree wholeheartedly with that. So coming into Gran Turismo, simply looking at it from Blomkamp's filmography and what we've experienced with them, I wasn't sure what to expect. Not just because of the material, but because of his inconsistencies as a filmmaker.
Well, that, and also the fact that it's an adaptation that he did not write, veering away from his usual sci-fi high concept flair. It almost felt like this was poised to be a necessity for him, a comeback, or like a director for hire kind of thing.
And that's a lot of what it is in some ways, but given those inconsistencies, maybe that's the only thing that he could get his hands on, because between Chappie and Demonic, there were a lot of things that fell through for him. Yeah. He was tapped to direct this, it fell through, and it was a good 6-year gap between Chappie and Demonic, I think. And Demonic was one of those movies that I don't think anyone really knew about. Like, it's something he made on the side. It certainly wasn't his first choice, and perhaps that plays into what you're saying in terms of it feeling like it was half-assed, probably because it was, feeling indignant that he wasn't able to direct what he really wanted to, but he wanted to make something, and he was able to put this together.
Have you seen any of his short films that he's made in the in between? No. I haven't either, but I've heard some pretty darn good things about most of them, actually. He's directed quite a few short films in between those two stretches.
Absolutely, and probably in hopes that one of them or something would take off and become a full feature,
like District 9 did.
Like District 9 did.
Johannesburg, I think it was called.
Absolutely, a lot of filmmakers certainly do things very similar. I think we talked about this a few weeks ago with Talk to Me. That started out as a short film.
Oh yeah. Heck, the classic example of Whiplash, right? Whiplash,
exactly. Exactly. I mean, this happens all the time. Gran Turismo does feel like a director for hire, and it might have been his only choice because it's the first film in his filmography he hasn't written, as you noted. And the content, the material here is so outside of his wheelhouse.
I know.
It's so different.
Nice pun there. Outside his wheelhouse.
Yeah, he was behind the wheel of a different car. And
nice.
And so that offered a little bit of intrigue here. And I do think, to your point, at times his aesthetic, his vision, from what we've seen in the previous films, it does come through in those racing sequences.
Yeah.
And so I did like his direction. I think really where this film stumbles is in classic Neill Blomkamp fashion, and it's storytelling.
Yep. Yeah.
Because I do think the script, even outside of its formula, it does have its blemishes, particularly with Jan's father, Steve, played by Jaimin Hansu, who was really great in this film. God bless him.
Yeah.
Is so very good in this movie, but Steve disappears for a big chunk of the movie, even when these big things are happening to his son. And that is significant because he's such a crucial piece. Speaking of Steve, he's such a crucial piece to the film's emotional backbone, given what we see between him and Jan in those early scenes and the tension and the conflict that's established there. And then we get this incredible moment of reconnection between the two near the end of the film. And oh my God, that moment, Hansu is so good. So good, delivering a striking pathos there as the film nears its third act. And it's absolutely remarkable. So for that character to just simply disappear makes no sense, especially when it's in lieu of the Audrey character, which is Jan's love interest, but there's no payoff to that character being in this movie at all. And I'm not really sure the purpose of it other than it fits within a certain formula that these screenwriters feel like it needs to have. But in execution, what is the point of it? Because it leads to absolutely nothing. And it takes away from Jan's father being in this movie, which was where all the poignancy of this film comes from.
Yeah, it's such a shame too. It's kind of one of those, tug of war situations, because the chemistry between Archie Madekwe, is that how you pronounce his name? I honestly should have looked this up.
Yeah.
Archie Madekwe. We'll go with I'll go with that for now, but I'll acknowledge that I'm probably pronouncing that pretty poorly, and I apologize for it. But his chemistry with Audrey's played by Mauve Couture Lily, I believe is how you pronounce. Again, I'm probably mispronouncing both these names now that I think about it. But their chemistry is actually pretty good. Like, I liked watching their dynamic, but at the same time, you're right. I'm with you. It is a distraction in the totality of what this movie is doing, especially when there are more important threads to flesh out, like the relationship between Jan and his father, Steve, or maybe getting a little bit more into the ethics of what Nissan is actually doing here, involving Danny Moore, played by Orlando Bloom, as this marketing exec for Nissan, looking at it from a business standpoint. The fact that they're basically just taking gamers and putting them into the most dangerous situation of their lives. It's talked about.
It's briefly mentioned at the beginning.
Yeah, but it feels more like a footnote, right? Mm-hmm. And I think the movie owes more of an explanation to that. So when you have that love interest that you're talking about, it does become an unfortunate distraction, even despite the chemistry, still being good. It's just, I don't think this is the right movie for it.
No, I mean, the film doesn't really pay too much mind to it. There's a scene early on where she's introduced as a potential love interest for Jan. Yeah. And then because of the racing, she also disappears for quite a while.
Honestly, you could have left it there. That one beginning scene, like that leaves a bit of a sting of something that he's leaving behind, Jan specifically. Like, that actually has more of an impact when you think about it.
I completely agree. And then there's the moment where, a couple of times we see him looking at her on Instagram, and then there's the moment when David Harbour's Jack is like, I've seen you looking at this girl. Why don't you bring her on over to Tokyo and we'll have a grand old time? And then you get a 30-second sequence of them going through Tokyo. And that's it. That's the payoff, I guess. It doesn't really lead to anything, especially dramatically or emotionally. And it takes away from his father being involved. And when he's signing that piece of paper in Tokyo, that's a significant piece of his life, giving credence to the idea that he was good enough, that this was more than just video games. And that was the entire setup of the conflict between him and his father early on. Yeah. So you would think that his father, watching him sign a professional contract to be a professional race driver, would be something we'd want to see as the audience, given that conflict they set up.
What we'd want to see. You would think that's what PlayStation wants us to see.
Exactly.
That's the message that they want this movie to convey.
No, and we don't see his reaction to it at all. Even if he's not going to be in Tokyo, because he's still grappling with it. I don't know. He's signing a professional contract, but is this a long-term solution? Mm-hmm. But we don't even get that. We get literally nothing. In lieu of Steve is the Audrey character, who provides zero value to Jan's arc in this film. Mm-hmm. And it's not until you get to the third act, and by that point, an hour and a half had gone by without seeing Steve at all.
Might have been more than that.
It might have been more than that. And
this movie is over 2 hours. Yeah, we have to acknowledge that.
It's 2 hours and 14 minutes. It is a little bit of a long movie. But it takes nearly 2 hours for Steve to come back before they have this moment of reconnection. And that's just too long. Now, the payoff is great because Hansu is a great actor and he brings this pathos out. And it is a moment of sincerity. And I do want to give the film credit for that because it is genuine, but arguably not earned because the script doesn't really care as much about it, even though in so many ways it's the emotional backbone of the film. And not just because of the conflict we see early on between them, the tension of his father wanting him to leave gaming behind, but throughout the film, we see little things like Jan putting the sticker on the helmet. That's his father's logo from his team. Like there's things like that that remind you that he is doing this for his father, or that his father is on his mind in some way, but his father is not in the movie. Why?
Didn't these writers and Neill Blomkamp himself, didn't they see Warrior?
Come on,
you
man.
want to follow a formula? Look at how that movie worked.
Yeah, like right there is your blueprint. You don't have to bring in the alcoholism. That's fine.
It's not even
the blueprint is right there.
It's not even Jaimin Hunsu. I mean, I love both parents in this movie. The mom, played by Jerry Horner, Ginger Spice herself. Like, there's a moment she has in the movie where I thought, okay, maybe she gives the best performance in the movie. And I think it's more so the cut itself, the editing.
Yes, I know the moment you're talking about.
There's a crash sequence. Yeah, there's a crash sequence here. And there's a moment of like somber quietness as people in the moment reflect on the severity of what they're actually seeing. And it instantly cuts to the parents watching it at home. And it's her reaction, as loud as that is, like it is devastatingly piercing.
It's good. No, it's real good. She brings some authenticity to it. That's great. And again, it's one of those things where you could see that and maybe it feels a little saccharine because we don't know much about these characters, especially Jan's mother, who is a footnote in this film.
Yeah.
But the performance makes it work. And I agree. So at least the film has performances that make up for where this script ultimately fails it.
That is really the biggest thing here that really saves the movie, as I alluded to. I don't think there's really a bad performance in this movie.
Oh, I agree. I really like David Harbour. Orlando Bloom is having a ball, having the time of his life.
Yeah.
In a little role. Like I do love these performances. And look, I want to give Blomkamp some credit because I do think the racing sequences are a lot of fun. I think there's a robust energy to them. The sound design is great. The musicality of this film, I think, is really wonderful. And it's a little bit of original music and score.
Yeah.
So you have soundtrack and score working together in this complementary way that I think is really fantastic. And there is a nice, fun, upbeat rhythm to the score that, keeps that energy alive. And you throw in his visuals and the way that he articulates Jan's vision for how he sees the road. And that does create some diverting effects here.
Yeah.
I just wish the script did more to complement it because I do think it's a heartwarming movie. There are affecting things here, but the thing that keeps it from being a Rush or a Warrior or a Ford v Ferrari.
Just going to say, you mentioned two recent movies involving racing in some way that I think are not just better movies, but in many ways, I think they even have better racing scenes from a directorial standpoint.
Yeah, I agree.
But at the same time, that's not to knock what Blomkamp's doing because he does bring his unique energy that we've seen in like a District 9 or a Chappie. I can sense those same attributes in those racing scenes, especially when it combines the simulation aspect with the real racing aspect. Like that's pretty cleverly done.
I agree. And I think that's why I keep going back to the script because Blomkamp, and it's funny, I didn't really think about this earlier until we started talking about his filmography. And it is maybe a little ironic that this is the first film he's done where he hasn't written the script. And it's one of the worst that he's had to deal with. I don't know if he simply struggles to do both things. I don't know. But I will say this. I think his direction here is actually quite strong. And maybe it's because he doesn't have a hand in the writing, so he can put all of his emphasis in his direction. And I say that specifically because what works about this film are those racing sequences, his vigorous vision that he throws in here, the music of it. Like where this film works is the Blomkamp of it all. It's not.
Yeah,
It's
that's
not
fair.
the writing. So you think about what this film could have been if it had a strong script, whether
Yeah.
his hand or someone else. And this genuinely could have been in the conversation with Rush and Ford v Ferrari.
There are certain directors that I think are only as good as their scripts allow them to be. I feel like we've talked about that with, let's say, a Ridley Scott, for instance. You look at some of his lesser films, coincidentally, some of them just don't have the best scripts to back them up. And I sometimes feel the same way with someone like Neill Blomkamp. Now, in most cases, he had a hand in writing. I think we can agree he's not really the best writer. He's a decent visionary. He really is. So if this film had a much stronger script, like I said, it almost felt like a first draft. It really does.
Yeah.
It feels very high level. Even the dialogue between characters.
Sure.
It was. Even the dialogue between characters sounds, I don't even know how to describe it. It's not that it sounds unnatural, but it just has a banality to it that I don't think a movie with this kind of energy should have. It's not that they need to be speaking in words that sound like real life, right? It doesn't need to be that direct or that obvious, but there needs to be a vibrancy to it or something. And it just doesn't quite have that. It doesn't quite have the nuance that I think it needs, especially since it feels like it's going for it. But if that was all there, like if the script was as strong as it could have been, especially considering the story at play, like I said, there's a great movie in here. There really is. There really is something special here.
And maybe in an indirect way, it does demonstrate that if given a more robust script that, again, he doesn't have a hand in, that Blomkamp can actually be a really competent and great director. Because I do think that's where this film shines is when he is in control. Yeah. When he's behind the wheel, when it's not about that insipid dialogue that you're talking about, or the formulaic plotting, or how much of the story here is chopped up and it's lost. A lot of the storylines here are introduced and then it gets lost. But that's not really Blomkamp's fault necessarily, because he didn't have a hand in this script. So he's following along what he's been given. But what he turns out are compelling racing scenes, fun music, fun energy, and really good performances that are at times affecting. Yeah. Really affecting. So he's given what he is responsible for, the racing and those emotional beats, and not just the moment of Jan and his father near the end that we've alluded to, but I think of the moment between Harbour's Jake character and Jan after the accident, and he takes him onto the track, and Jack has this conversation where he reveals what happened to him in his own crash, and how he came to this crossroads. Yep. He had this existential crisis, and he has to live with the choice that he made. And he's laying all of this out in front of Jan, saying, you are now at those same crossroads, and you can think about it existentially, but you have to make a choice. Yeah. What is it going to be? That is a really great moment. And I'll be fair to the writers there in terms of the writing. I think it's strong, but why that scene works mostly is the tender quality of it tonally and the performances and the way it's staged.
It almost doesn't matter
more than the script.
It almost doesn't matter what is said there. Now, I will say, as much as I criticize the writing and even the dialogue, there's at least some good dialogue there where you can tell, or at least hypothesize, where the passion was from a scripting standpoint. And I think that's a scene that does represent that. And even though it is a very formulaic scene and a very formulaic relationship that you see in a sports movie, though that moment does work. It does. I mean, it's very much a Rocky Mickey thing. It's very much a Clint Eastwood, Hilary Swank thing. I mean, we've seen this many times, but
it's expected, but
but I don't care if it's expected. Just do it well. And that scene does handle it very well.
I completely agree. So to me, that's where this film is at its strongest, is when Blomkamp is really able to take control of the wheel, as they say, when we're talking about
how many driving puns have we made here? I think we made at least 3. Is that 3 too many?
Yeah, at least a few. what did you think of the final Le Mans sequence? And it's interesting because if I remember correctly, isn't that the same climax of Ford v Ferrari?
Well, it's the same
That the
track, I
same
think.
track. That's what I mean.
Yeah,
The same
yeah,
race.
yeah. I, well, I mean, I thought it was thrilling, and I think a lot of it is because it's been a while since I've seen Ford v Ferrari, or at least when I say a while, it's when that first came out, and what was that, 2019? I think it was maybe
Something like
20.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, both of these movies emphasize the longevity of that race, the
Yes.
24-hour
Yeah.
aspect of it.
Hmm.
And in Ford v Ferrari, that was very much felt. That sense of time was almost like a character in that race. Like the track itself is torturous because of how lengthy that the race literally is from a timing standpoint.
Hmm.
So you feel that passage of time. And that's why the race here does work for me, because again, you feel that passage of time. Of course, there are obstacles at play when you're dealing with a race that lasts 24 hours. You're going to potentially run into issues like Mother Nature coming into play. There are some rain sequences here that are beautifully shot, but they don't feel like the real threat. The real threat feels like, how do you make yourself last in a race like this? The stamina of it. And I do think Blomkamp handles that very well. So I do think it's a
Yeah.
pretty thrilling race because of that interplay. And again, it's by the books as far as the character banter, the story, and the way that the narrative concludes. But the way that they bring about a teammate dynamic by bringing some other members of the GT Academy to
Yeah.
partake in that is, again, it's formulaic. It's what we've seen before in movies like this. But
Yeah.
again, the performances made me feel an uplifting
Yeah.
quality to it.
Hmm. Yeah, really, my only pushback against that final sequence is that I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of that teamwork aspect,
That's
because
fair.
these characters were rivals in those early scenes, and the film does emphasize that on occasion, especially
Yeah.
the American. And then they come
Maddie
back.
Davis. Yeah.
Yeah, and and then these characters come back, and they have a charming little moment of reconnection when the team comes together, and so you see some unity there. But as the race unfolds, and you do see the longevity of it as you're talking about, and all three characters get their little moment in the car.
Hmm.
But to see a little bit more of the teammates and that dynamic, I think would have been
Yeah.
good. But this is a
We
film
get
that
an
was,
yeah.
it's already 2 hours and 14 minutes, and you're wanting to get to show this race as much as possible for the reasons you talked about. So
Yeah.
I get why
Yeah.
they don't.
I'm
And
with.
of
I
course
get it.
you want to showcase Jan more than anyone else in his participation in this, what he did there on that track, and how he was pivotal to where they ended up finishing.
Sure. Yeah.
So I get it. So it's one of those selfish things, but
I hear you. I think that moment of reconciliation was so strong that I was kind of okay with it,
mm,
and especially
yeah,
given
yeah,
especially given the fact that that moment of reconciliation was really driven by this devastating crash that happened midway through the film.
yeah,
And that crash is so affecting that it kind of lingers and justifies that moment of reconciliation. But yeah,
yeah,
you're right.
yeah,
That selfishly speaking, it would have been nice to kind of to sense that friendly interplay a little bit more because it was
yeah.
so fresh. Like, did we need it? Maybe not, but it would have been nice to see it. I think it
Hmm.
actually in many ways we probably did need it because given where this movie does end and the camaraderie at play during the celebration at the end, yeah, you kind of need a
Yeah.
little bit of brotherly love to
Yeah,
to
there's
to
really not
communicate
much
that.
camaraderie. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, like, it's a little thing, especially when most of where this film falters is in other areas. Like, I will give them some grace when it comes to this. There are
Hmm.
bigger problems with this film, but I think seeing that camaraderie would have perhaps added some poignancy, or maybe add some more scenes between Jan and his father, because even as they're celebrating, we don't really get much of that either. So in
Yeah.
terms of payoff, given some of these side quests that the film wants to take us on, again, there's literally nothing with the girl. There's no payoff at all. She
There
just
isn't.
flat out disappears after Tokyo. Like she might linger in the background, but that's it.
Yeah, she shows up for the final race at Le Mans, but again, she's just there. She's a spectator.
She's literally just there, a spectator, someone that is on camera. In fact, she might even be in a few frames and you don't even know. Like that's how insignificant of a character she is here.
Yeah.
So again, you don't really need that. I think there might have been a few better ways to fully crystallize everything that we see here. But on the whole, I did enjoy it. I just don't think this comes close to the same heights as others like it.
No, I'm with you. And even within Neill Blomkamp's filmography, the 5 feature films that he has directed, I think it's middle of the road. I'd put this at number 3 out of 5 at this point right now. District 9 is certainly a better movie. And like I said, I think this is a tighter movie than something like Chappie, but Chappie's a fascinating film. I
love it.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm in a weird space right now, JD, with regard to my love of films that are just cynical and messy, but are bold and ambitious. I wouldn't be surprised if I go back to Chappie and say, yep, this is his best movie. I wouldn't be surprised.
I truly, genuinely love it. District 9 for sure is his best made movie to date. And it's great for all the reasons people have talked about. But I truly love Chappie almost as much, while recognizing that it does falter in some areas, as we talked about earlier. But those are easily my 2 favorite of his. And so then after that, it's, maybe we can debate Elysium and Gran Turismo. Like I might appreciate Elysium a little bit more, even if Gran Turismo is more solid, I guess.
It sounds like you're higher on Elysium overall than I am. Like that's a movie I don't hate, but I mean I don't like Demonic either, but at times I almost want to rank Demonic a little bit higher than Elysium. I don't care for Elysium at all. I really don't.
Well, I think it's fine. I don't actively hate it, but I don't actively like it either. Again, like there are individual things of it in a microcosm I do like, but same thing with Gran Turismo as well. So I guess flip a coin when it comes to those two.
Interestingly, looking back at a movie like Elysium, one of the things we talked about as to why we appreciated District 9 and even Chappie is because of the central performance, right?
Yeah.
Sharto Copley.
Yeah.
And of course, he's in Elysium, and from a performance standpoint, probably the best thing in the movie. In fact, from a performance standpoint, I think he's the only good thing in Elysium. Like I love Matt Damon, but I don't think he's good at all in that movie. Which kind of gets into this thing. Like some directors, if they don't work with the right scripts or they don't work with the right actors, and when I say right actors, I don't mean good versus bad actors. I mean there are certain great actors that develop a certain relationship with their directors that is either good or bad. And that can affect the performance in a movie as well as how the movie comes about being made. And I did not get that synergy in Elysium. I did not feel that. And I think the performances suffer because of it.
No, I think that's fair. I would also say the same thing about Jodie Foster. Like that film is
what is she doing in that movie?
She is not good. Not good at all in that film. So, like, again, I don't know what Blomkamp was trying to do there.
Top 3 performances that are a complete enigma. Jodie Foster and Elysium.
Absolutely insane, But that's a film that also features Diego Luna and William Fichtner, and I can't really recall their performances specifically. I think they're fine. Yeah, I'd have to rewatch it, but
certainly better than Matt Damon and Jodie Foster.
I agree. They're not their best work. Not their best work. I very much do agree. I guess Elysium is a film that I want to admire because I do think there is ambition there. I just think Blomkamp stumbles over his toes so heavily that it becomes this very frustrating experience. Comparatively to something like Gran Turismo, as we've been talking about, is extremely formulaic, but that's not really on Blomkamp because he didn't write the film. And if anything, it's his work as a director, his efforts that overcome that formula. So there's certainly an argument to be made that it's certainly the better film of the two, just for that reason. But
Right. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
I'm with you.
fine. I'll settle on Gran Turismo at 3 and Elysium at 4.
You're welcome.
We talked our way there.
It's funny how that works, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. What do they say? Talk things out, you'll get to the answer.
Exactly. That's the whole point of this show, just to work out our feelings. Any final thoughts on Gran Turismo?
I mean, I'm not in love with the movie, but I do like it overall. We haven't really talked much about Archie Madekwe. Again, I hope I'm pronouncing that name right, but he is very good in the movie. He's very
I like
charismatic. I don't know if charismatic's the right word, but I was always interested in watching him on screen. I'll just say that. I think he's very effective, and it has great chemistry, especially with David Harbour for those scenes that really require it.
I agree. I think he's very good, and I think he does a great job of tapping into this perhaps softer quality in those early scenes, but also someone that's stern. Like, he's very firm in what he believes in, and he's not afraid to showcase that even to his father. We talked about how there's conflict between them up front, and a lot of that stems from his father wanting, like, not believing in the gaming thing, because how often does, focusing on a game for 40 hours a week turn into a real life job? I mean, you can't really blame him, right, for wanting his son to, not necessarily take away his passions, but look at his life in a more realistic fashion.
Yeah, he's practical.
He's practical, but Jan believes in himself and believes that he can channel this and turn it into something pragmatic for himself. And then obviously he's able to do that, which is why it is so goddamn frustrating that the film just loses sight of that for 2 hours.
Yeah.
At any rate,
and of course, one of the writers here, Zach Balin, of course, wrote. This guy has written 3 sports movies at this point now, or at least co-written 3 sports movies. I feel like he's becoming the sports writer guy in Hollywood, because not only do you have this, but you also have Creed 3, and before that you had King Richard, 2 sports movies that were all about paternal relationships.
Yeah.
Why does this ignore that?
That is a great question. That is a really great question. I have no idea.
Yeah.
But, that is to say, when it comes to Madekwe's performance, I do like how he, is able to find a balance of being a little awkward, a little shy, something that Orlando Bloom's Danny character, we haven't really talked much about him, but he was a little unsure of Jan at first because he doesn't have an on-screen persona, and this was a marketing ploy after all. He could drive, but if you put him in front of a camera, is he going to stumble and look like a buffoon? And that was Danny's concern. And I think Madekwe does a really good job of tapping into that awkwardness, but also his confidence and his joy and his ability. Like, he gives credence to the character that, yes, he can drive and do well at this. And so, I think he's very good here. His performance is quite good.
And I do love that. In any other movie like this, if there's anything that this movie does to subvert formula, Danny would have been poised as the villain of a story like this.
Yes.
And again, this is a true story, so you can't really fall into those trappings if you want to be as authentic. I mean, assuming that this is authentic.
Yeah, we don't really know anything.
We don't really know. We're just going by what we see here. We're going. This is
Yeah.
based on a true story. Of course, it's authentic. The movie told us. It can't lie.
Exactly.
But I do at least respect that the film doesn't take, I guess, the normal way out for the Danny character. This easily could have made him the villain, and it doesn't really do that.
Yeah, it doesn't. I mean, he might have been reserved with Jan at first, and I kind of admire that there's actually a little bit of ambiguity between Danny and Jack as far as why they ultimately, I'll say vaguely, chose Jan, because there was a moment where they really got to make a choice.
Yeah.
And
that was the closest. That's maybe that's why I feel like the film does subvert expectations, because that moment there is like the villain reveal, right?
Yeah.
Like, that moment right there was basically telling us, oh, Danny's a marketing guy, he's a business guy, he's not going to look at this from the human perspective. And there are some ambiguities about how we're supposed to feel about Danny. At times we We find him very endearing, but then he makes choices that are clearly, looking at it from both a humanistic but also marketing perspective, and we find ourselves a little frustrated by that. So
Yeah.
I do think Orlando Bloom taps into those ambiguities pretty well. I like that the movie doesn't make him a full-on villain like it could have, and it easily could have gone that route, but it doesn't fully do that.
I agree. I think they treat Danny with good diligence, and it is surprising because in some ways you do expect him to become the antagonist of sorts.
Yeah.
And he does play that role at times. Even in the Le Mans sequence, there's a moment where he's like, I don't know if we should do this.
Yeah.
But on the whole, he's not one note. Like the humanity of the character is still very much there, especially when it comes to something like the crash sequence, for example. So like, there's still a humanity to Danny that I think is really great. So yeah, I do think they handle that character.
I would agree
very well. A couple of other quick notes real fast. So one thing that I think is interesting, obviously this film is called Gran Turismo. It is inspired off this game.
Yeah.
So there is a character that is actually the creator of the game, Kanzori Yamuchi. I'm probably butchering that name. Please forgive me. However,
I think it's
the character.
Kazunori Yamaguchi, or Yamuchi.
Yeah. And so the character is in the film played by Takiro Hira. However, the real Yamuchi cameos in this film as a sushi chef, which I think is kind of funny. So like,
another creator of something delicious.
Exactly.
And of course, in that scene, they react to how great the sushi is. So imagine how meta that is.
Yeah. And so I didn't know that until after the fact, but I thought that was a fun little thing.
That's actually pretty cute. Yeah.
And the other last note I want to make about this movie, because I feel like oftentimes when it comes to movies acting as commercials, it's a lot of the time it's really quite brazen. You think of something like Michael Bay as one of those, vivid examples. You got Mark Wahlberg throwing out a Bud Light in the middle of a Transformers movie. And, and movies do this a lot because, they have to make money to afford these production costs and whatnot. I do think it is interesting here how Sony gets to have its cake and eat it too. We talked about this a little bit on episode 549, that this isn't an adaptation of the game. So it's not an exploitative, let's talk about how great Gran Turismo is and PlayStation and look at us and aren't we great? This is acting way more as a biopic. This is a biopic in a sports movie.
Yeah.
However, it just happens to be about a guy who played video games and channeled that into real life success. And it is an inspirational story. Yeah. So it's one of those things from Sony's perspective that, yes, it does play out as a commercial in some ways. There are PlayStation logos all over this film.
Oh, yeah.
However, given the context of this story and how it unfolds and the inspiration behind it all, it's not. This is the least egregious example of a commercial in movies.
Yeah, that's true.
And
that's true.
I have to give them credit for that.
It's not in your face. I mean, it's in your face without being in your face, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think they do a good job of taking that commercialization and using it for the storytelling. That, hey, this is a game that he played.
Yeah.
We're not making that up. That's just what it was.
Yeah.
And so of course you're going to see the game. You're going to see PlayStation in the film, and it's every mega corporation's dream. This story
is to have a sports biopic named after them.
Not even that, like to
I know
have
I'm being
a real story of a guy taking your product and doing something incredible with it.
Yeah. So I guess when we become famous for our story, Libsyn's going to be the one that is the one that gets all the credit.
Something to that effect. At any rate, I just wanted to throw it out there because a lot of the time, we make fun of commercialization in movies. And it is egregious a lot of the time, but you understand why it's there. But there are times like this where, it's effective and kind of fun.
Yeah,
and I think they make it work.
Kind of works, yeah. Don't love the movie. I wish I loved the movie, but it's certainly passable. So it definitely has more going for it than it doesn't.
At any rate, those are our thoughts on Gran Turismo. Let us know if you agree or disagree with anything we had to say here. You can hit us up on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, whatever it may be. You can email us incessionfilm@gmail.com as well. Leave a comment below if you're watching this on YouTube. Let us know how you feel about this movie. Of course, subscribe, hit the like button, all that fun stuff they tell you to do on YouTube.
Yep.
Brendan, any final thoughts before we get out of here?
One thing I did not acknowledge about the movie Gran Turismo, there's a drinking game waiting to happen in this movie. Anytime you hear a song play in the background, non-diegetically, that then all of a sudden switches to diegetic based on some character listening to it on their headphones.
Oh, yes.
Make a drinking game out of that. Take a shot every time you see that happen.
Yeah.
I'll tell you this: you definitely won't be sober.
No, you won't.
Quite a bit.
No, and it's also interesting too. The soundtrack to this film, which is on Spotify, I encourage you to go listen to it because it is one of the most insane soundtracks because the variety is all over the place. It is incredible the different sects of music that you get here. It is.
Yeah. So
there's no two songs that are alike on the soundtrack.
If your two favorite bands / artists are Black Sabbath and Enya, you're gonna love this movie.
yeah, because you'll go from Enya to Kenny G to Black Sabbath to hip hop. It's wild. It's a wild ride.
Hey, it's a music lover's dream. I loved all the music here.
Yeah, I loved it. Yeah, I love the soundtrack. I would say that as a bad thing.
Yeah,
like it's jarring in a really fun way. So yeah, definitely go and check that out. Thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We will see you next time on the In Session Film Podcast. John Hansu, God bless his soul.
I'm just gonna go listen to Kenny G right now.